Let me tell you something, the history books conveniently brushed aside a story so outrageous, so profitable, that it makes Blackbeard's loot look like pocket change. You know the names: Black Bart, Blackbeard, Calico Jack. Their tales are splashed across every pirate book and movie. But the truth, the single most valuable pirate heist ever carried out an event that changed fortunes, sparked international outrage, and even shifted the balance of global trades, a story almost no one tells. And that, my friend, is exactly why you're here. Picture it, a lonely horizon. A merchant ship fat with riches crawling through the ocean like a lamb waiting for the slaughter. Its holds don't just carry gold, they carry something more precious than kingdoms. Cargo that entire empires would kill for. And in the shadows, a pirate crew watches, waiting. Their captain calculating every breath, every flicker of wind, every ounce of fear in his men's eyes. When they strike, it will be swift, merciless, and brilliant. The world will never forget the treasure they took, except the world somehow did. Why? Because the powers of Europe buried the truth. They couldn't let you know that pirates once snatched away wealth so vast it could have bankrolled nations. But tonight, we're going to drag this secret heist back from the depths of the sea. We're going to follow the forgotten captain who dared to do what others wouldn't, the crew who gambled everything, and the empire that swore vengeance after their prize was stolen beneath their very nose. And trust me, when you hear what cargo was taken, you'll realize this wasn't just a robbery. It was a blow against kings and crowns, a theft so bold that it rattled Thrones. So, are you ready? Because this tale begins with a ship so heavy with fortune it was said the ocean groaned beneath it, and a crew of outlaws preparing to pounce like sharks in the night. The ship was called the Nossa Senhora do Cabo, a Portuguese galleon so vast and so heavy with riches that it seemed less a vessel than a floating vault, her decks groaning beneath the weight of gold, jewels, spices, silks, and ivory that represented not merely wealth but empire itself. She had sailed from Goa, India, her holds filled with the treasures of the East, bound for Lisbon where her cargo would line the coffers of kings and fund wars against rival powers. To escort her, the Portuguese crown dispatched a small squadron, but storms and misfortune had scattered them across the Atlantic, leaving the galleon to plod forward alone, her sails patched, her crew weary. Her only protection, the arrogance of believing no pirate would dare assault such a leviathan. But arrogance, like calm seas, is always temporary. For weeks, another ship shadowed her across the horizon, the Fancy, a frigate flying false colors. Her captain, a man whispered of in taverns, but rarely named in polite company, Henry Every, also called Long Ben. A pirate so cunning and ruthless that even hardened sailors muttered prayers when his name was spoken. Every was no drunken brute like Rackham, no flamboyant monster like Blackbeard. He was something far more dangerous, patient. He had watched the Cabo since she strayed from her escorts, had studied her routes, her movements, the condition of her rigging, and when he judged the time was right, he gathered his men and whispered, "Tomorrow, lads, we pluck a king's heart from his chest." The dawn came grey and heavy, the sea sluggish, the wind faint. The Cabo lumbered westward, her sails swollen but tired, her crew half dreaming of land. On the Fancy, silence reigned until Every gave the order. The false flag was hauled down, the black banner unfurled, and the pirates surged forward, their ship cutting through the waves like a predator closing in on prey. Cannons roared, smoke belched across the water, and chaos erupted. The Portuguese fought valiantly, muskets cracking from the decks, but they were outmatched. The Fancy's guns shredded her rigging, her sails sagged, and before long, grappling hooks flew through the air, iron biting wood, ropes straining as the pirates dragged themselves aboard with cutlasses bared Mary, Black Bart, Calico Jack. No, this was Henry Every's moment, and his crew fought with a ferocity that comes only when the prize is beyond imagining. Blood painted the decks, screams split the air, and the clash of steel echoed across the waves. Every himself strode among his men, pistol in one hand, sword in the other, calm amid the carnage. "Spare those who yield," he barked. 4 dead men carried no secrets, but living ones could be forced to open the vaults. And when at last the smoke cleared, the Cabo was theirs, her crew chained, her captain trembling, her cargo ripe for the taking. What they found defied belief. In the galleon's hold, locked in iron chests and stacked in glittering piles, lay the wealth of empires, bars of gold, sacks of silver, strings of pearls, diamonds cut and uncut, rubies that glowed like fire in the lantern light. There were silks from China, carpets from Persia, ivory tusks from Africa, spices that perfumed the air with cinnamon, nutmeg, and cloves so strong that even amid the stench of blood and powder, the scent lingered. The pirates stared in stunned silence before erupting into cheers so loud they drowned the crash of waves. One man wept openly, clutching a handful of gems. Another kissed the deck, shouting, "We're kings now, kings." Henry Every only smiled, a small, hard smile, and said, "Aye, lads. Kings we are, but kings are hunted." For this was no ordinary heist. The value of the cargo was staggering, estimated at over £200,000 billions in today's machunuf, to rival the annual revenue of entire nations. Word of the capture spread like fire across the seas, carried by whispers in ports from the Caribbean to London. The East India Company raged, the Portuguese crown howled, and the English government, embarrassed by a subject turned outlaw, swore vengeance. Every had not merely robbed a ship, he had humiliated empires, and yet, for all its glory, the heist sowed seeds of doom. The loot was too vast to divide quietly, too infamous to sell without risk. Every's men grew restless, greedy, suspicious. In dark corners of taverns, deals were struck, betrayals plotted. The gold that should have been their freedom became their curse. And as Henry Every stared out across the ocean, the black flag snapping above him, he knew that the true battle was only beginning, not against kings or navies, but against the greed and betrayal simmering within his own crew. The most valuable pirate heist the world had ever seen had been carried out. Yes, but surviving it would prove far deadlier than seizing it. The hold of the captured Nassau Senora do Cabo was a cathedral of greed, its piles of gold and jewels shimmering in the dim lantern light like molten fire, casting every pirate's face in a glow that made them look less like men and more like demons born of hunger. And as the pirates of the Fancy stood shoulder to shoulder in the treasure hold, their eyes wide, their hands trembling as they reached for pearls, diamonds and bars of gold heavier than a man's arm, Henry Every knew that this moment, this sweet, intoxicating revelation of their prize was as dangerous as any broadside of cannon fire. For men who once fought like brothers now looked upon one another as rivals, each calculating how much their share would be, each wondering whether a pistol at night might double their fortune. And it was then that Every's voice cut through the fever of lust, steady and cold, None touches a coin until it is divided fair, and none leaves this ship until I say so." His words carried the weight of command, but even he saw the glances exchanged, the muttered curses swallowed behind teeth. And he knew it was not discipline that held them in line, but fear of his steel and his cunning. They dragged the treasure from the hold to the deck, chest after chest groaning under the weight of empire, and under the hot sun they began the grim arithmetic of division. Piles were made, lots drawn, coin and jewels distributed with as much fairness as could be forced upon men drunk with greed. Each pirate received riches beyond imagining, more than any had dreamed when they first raised the black flag. But still there were mutters, accusations of shorting, of favoritism, of hidden chests tucked away by others. Every himself claimed a captain's portion, larger than the rest. And though most accepted it with gritted teeth, a few spat on the deck, their resentment as sharp as their knives. "He's no king," one muttered under his breath. "Just another thief who thinks himself above us." Yet none dared say it aloud within every's earshot, for his pistol was as quick as his wit, and already the men whispered that he slept with one eye open, his cutlass never out of reach. The treasure glittered, but already it was poisoned. Each man, once free of want, was now chained by suspicion. At night in the hammocks, some lay awake clutching their share, pistols ready, fearing their own comrades more than the gallows. Fights broke out over pearls lost, coins miscounted, or insults real and imagined. One man accused another of pocketing an emerald before the division, and the quarrel ended with blood spilled on the planks, the emerald rolling through the scuppers into the sea. Every watched, silent, his jaw tight, knowing that the treasure they had risked their lives to seize might yet destroy them from within. But he also knew the greater danger was not among his men, but beyond the horizon. For word of their heist was spreading like wildfire, carried on the lips of merchants, survivors, and spies. In the courts of Europe, outrage boiled. The Portuguese crown demanded vengeance. The East India Company roared for blood, and the English government, embarrassed that one of its own subjects had pulled off the greatest heist in history, promised that Henry Every would be hunted from the Indies to the Isles, from Africa to the Americas. For the first time in history, a global manhunt was declared, and Every's name was etched into wanted posters plastered in London, Boston, and Calcutta alike. Still, aboard the Fancy, the men celebrated as though the world were theirs. Drums pounded, rum flowed, songs filled the air. They dreamed of paradise, of retiring as kings in Madagascar, of buying taverns in the Caribbean, of ruling plantations in the colonies. Yet beneath their laughter, fear lingered. They knew the price on their heads grew with every whisper of their deeds. Every himself gathered his officers on the quarterdeck, his face shadowed by lantern light, his voice low. "We've won a king's ransom, aye, but now the world itself will turn against us. The navy will hunt us, the company will curse us, and every harbor will close its gates to our sails. We have two choices, vanish or die," his officers murmured, some urging to break apart, each man to seek his fortune alone, others swearing loyalty to stick together. Unhealed by argument, they debated until dawn, and in the end Every's plan won. They would steer for Madagascar, that pirate haven at the edge of the world, where no king's law held sway, and there they would vanish into paradise with their loot. The men cheered, raising cups to their captain, but not all voices joined, and in the silence of those who did not cheer lay the seeds of betrayal yet to come. The voyage to Madagascar was long and perilous. The treasure weighing down the ship, as though it cursed the timbers. Storms battering the sails, men bickering more fiercely with each passing day. Once, during a tempest, lightning split the sky, striking the mainmast, splintering it in flame. And some swore it was divine judgment for the theft of holy wealth. "God will not suffer us to live," one sailor muttered, crossing himself feverishly. Mary, if she were alive, she'd laugh at such piety. But Henry Every silenced the talk with a glare and a pistol pointed skyward. "If God wished us dead, he'd have struck me, not the mast," he growled. And the men, half believing, half terrified, obeyed. Yet whispers of doom lingered in the storm's wake. And more than once, Every caught men gazing longingly at the sea, as though considering slipping away with a chest in the longboats. To keep order, he enforced brutal discipline. A man caught stealing from another's share was lashed until his back was raw. Another who plotted desertion was hanged from the yardarm, his body left swinging as a warning. The treasure had made them rich, but it had also made them prisoners of their own greed, chained tighter than any jailer could bind. At last, the coast of Madagascar appeared, green and wild, dotted with coves and harbors where pirates mingled with traders, where gold bought loyalty and muskets enforced silence. The Fancy anchored in a hidden bay, and for a time it seemed the dream had come true. The men divided further, some taking their shares ashore, others spending nights in drunken revelry, their coins vanishing as quickly as they had come. Brothels, taverns, and traders thrived. Their owners fattened on pirate gold, and the island sang with laughter and violence. Every himself kept aloof, storing his portion carefully, whispering plans to vanish entirely, to slip away while the others drowned in rum and whores. But the noose of the world was tightening. News reached Madagascar that the East India Company had pressured governments into a joint crusade. Henry Every and his crew were declared enemies of all nations, their capture a duty for any loyal subject. Ships scoured the seas, spies infiltrated ports, and the name Every became a curse. Pirates whispered that the company had sworn to crucify him alive if caught. And then, betrayal. One night, as the men drank ashore, a quarrel erupted between factions, those who wanted to disband quietly and vanish into the world, and those who swore to follow Every still. Knives were drawn, pistols fired, and the sand of the cove turned red with pirate blood. Survivors fled in every direction, some seizing small ships to scatter across the ocean, others vanishing into the jungle. Every, watching from the shadows, knew the dream of unity was gone. He slipped away with a handful of loyalists, loading his treasure into the Fancy, and under cover of darkness sailed eastward, leaving behind the screams of his crew. When dawn broke, the bay was silent, the paradise stained with corpses, the once brotherhood shattered forever. Where Henry Every went next is the question that has haunted history. Some say he sailed for the American colonies, hoping to vanish among settlers with his fortune. Others insist he returned to England in disguise, living out his days quietly under another name. Still others swear he was betrayed, captured, and executed in secret, his treasure seized by the very powers who once hunted him. What is certain is that the Fancy was never seen again, nor was the bulk of the treasure of the Nossa Senhora do Cabo, chests of gold. Pearls, diamonds, vanished as if swallowed by the sea. Sailors still whisper that it lies hidden in some forgotten cove in Madagascar, waiting for the one bold enough to claim it. And as the legend spread, one thing became clear. The most valuable pirate heist the world had ever seen did not end with the capture of the treasure, but with its disappearance, leaving behind nothing but whispers, betrayal, and the echo of Henry Every's name carried on the waves. For, if gold is a curse, then perhaps Henry Every had only delayed his own hanging. The disappearance of the Fancy and her crew did not end the tale of the heist. It ignited a firestorm that raged from London to Lisbon, from Calcutta to the Caribbean, a fury so intense that it birthed something the world had never seen before, the first truly global manhunt. And at the heart of it all was one name, whispered with awe and rage, alike Henry, every pirate, thief, outlaw, ghost. In England, the East India Company, whose wealth and reputation had been stained by the audacity of the crime, pounded on the doors of Parliament, demanding blood, demanding vengeance, demanding that this insult to their empire be avenged. Merchants screamed of ruined trade, investors trembled. Kings and queens were humiliated that their seas could be plundered with such ease. The company's directors, cold men in wigs and lace, declared that no ship would be safe until every swung from the gallows. And their words carried such weight that even the crown itself bent beneath them. Broadsheets screamed his name, ballads cursed him, and pamphlets painted him as a devil in flesh, a monster whose greed threatened the very fabric of empire. In Boston, in New York, in Charleston, posters with his likeness, rough sketches of a scarred, bearded man with a cutlass at his hip were nailed to tavern doors, promising fortunes to any who brought him in. Sailors carried his tale into every port, their versions twisted and wild. Some claimed he lived in palaces built on his treasure. Others swore he had struck a pact with the devil, his ship invisible on the seas. Others still muttered that he had vanished into the jungles of Madagascar, living as a king among savages. And all the while, the truth slipped further into shadow. Henry Every himself, aboard the Fancy, knew what hunted him. He could feel the world tightening like a noose around his neck, every harbor a trap, every stranger a spy. His men, once drunk on riches, grew restless and paranoid, clutching their shares like lifelines, whispering of splitting away before the noose found them all. Every held them with iron discipline, his voice calm but his eyes cold. "Stay the course," he told them, "and we'll vanish where no king's law can reach us." Yet even he knew the world would not relent. In taverns across Europe, preachers thundered that God's wrath would smite the pirate who had dared steal a fortune meant for Christendom. In Calcutta, officials of the East India Company fumed that Every's theft had insulted not only Portugal but the Mughal emperor himself. For among the CABO's cargo were jewels meant as tribute. The emperor's outrage threatened to rupture trade itself, to close the ports of India to English merchants, a disaster greater than any lost ship. The company shrieked and Parliament moved. For the first time, governments of Europe cooperated across oceans to hunt a single man. Meanwhile, Every's crew splintered further. Some deserted in Madagascar, vanishing into the wilderness or boarding passing ships under false names. Others plotted against their captain, whispering that he had hoarded more than his share, that his portion gleamed heavier than theirs. One drunken night, a sailor dared to confront him, pistol shaking in his hand, spitting, "You stole from us, Long Ben. You kept back diamonds fit for a king." Every's reply was swift and brutaler, shot through the chest that left the man gasping on the planks, his blood mingling with spilled rum. Every's calm voice carried over the stunned silence. "Accuse me again and join him." No one spoke after that, but the silence was heavy with fear. Anne Bonny once said that Rackham's cowardice doomed him. But with Every it was his cold certainty, his refusal to falter, that kept him alive. Still, fear is a poor glue for brotherhood. and each passing day fewer eyes looked at him with loyalty, more with calculation as the noose of empire tightened. The legend of Henry Every grew stranger. Reports of sightings filled the oceans like ghost lights. A scarred man spending diamonds in Havana, a mysterious captain buying land in Ireland, a ragged sailor with fierce eyes working in Charleston. Were these Every himself, or merely echoes of his name? In some tales he died rich, living as a gentleman in Devonshire, his treasure hidden in plain sight. In others he died penniless, betrayed by his own crew, rotting in obscurity. But while the stories spread, the real Every moved like a shadow, always one step ahead of those who hunted him. He knew he could not sail forever. The oceans were too wide, too watched. His only hope lay in vanishing utterly, discarding Henry Every as he had once discarded the false flags of nations, becoming someone else, someone invisible. But could a man who had stolen the world's greatest treasure ever truly disappear? The climax of the manhunt came when several of Every's men were captured, betrayed by greed as they tried to spend their shares in Boston and London. They were hauled to trial, their shackled bodies paraded before jeering crowds, the courts roaring with fury. The judges demanded they name their captain, demanded they reveal his fate. Some wept and claimed ignorance. Others swore he had fled to Ireland. One whispered that Every had taken the lion's share and abandoned them, sailing east into the unknown. Their words only deepened the mystery, for none agreed, and each seemed a shard of truth wrapped in lies. Still, the gallows claimed them, their bodies left to rot as warnings. But of Henry Every himself, there was no trace, and this is the twist that gnawed at kings and merchants alike. The man who carried out the greatest heist in history, who humiliated empires, who triggered the first global manhunt without a trace. No grave, no body, no gallows, only whispers, shadows, and questions. Did he die rich, sipping wine in some hidden manor? Did he die poor, robbed of all, alone in a foreign port? Or did he live still, his treasure buried in some forgotten cove, his eyes watching from the shadows of taverns where his own name was cursed? The world had unleashed its fury, but Henry Every had done the one thing no empire could abide. He had disappeared, and somewhere, in the silence of the ocean, the treasure of the Cabo still waits. The years that followed the capture of the Nassau Senora do Cabo did not dim the fire of Henry Every's legend. They fanned it, turning him from man into myth, from pirate into phantom, until his name was spoken in whispers across oceans, feared in the corridors of power and sung in the low taverns of Kingston, Bristol, and Tortuga. And though the East India Company and the Portuguese crown declared him an enemy of mankind, though the English government spread posters promising his capture dead or alive, still Every eluded them, slipping through the cracks like smoke, always just beyond the reach of the noose. And with each year his treasure seemed to grow in the telling, until sailors swore he had seized not only gold and jewels, but holy relics, cursed idols, even maps to lands no empire dared claim. The truth was simpler and stranger. Every had become a ghost, not by magic, but by cunning, shifting identities like sails in the wind, vanishing into ports, disguised as a humble trader, a scarred deckhand, a gentleman with a false name and finer clothes than his station suggested. In some ports he was said to drink alone, sliding coins heavy with age across the table. In others, he was whispered to lead a quiet family life, his children none the wiser of their father's infamy. The world searched, yet he endured, not as the roaring captain of the fancy, but as a shadow man, living by disguise, by patience, by paranoia, so thick he slept with one eye open until the end of his days. Yet not all his crew were so fortunate. Those who had deserted with shares of the treasure discovered that gold, no matter how vast, burned through fingers like rum. In Boston, a pirate named Joseph Dawson tried to buy a tavern, flashing diamonds like pebbles. But he was recognized, dragged before the courts, and hanged as a spectacle, the crowd jeering as if his jewels could somehow absolve their envy. In London, another of Every's men, Nicholas Boone, was caught trying to fence pearls and silks, his swagger turning to begging when the rope was slipped around his neck. In Charleston, whispers spread of a man who claimed to be one of Every's quartermasters, boasting of his fortune until he vanished one night. His body later found floating in the harbor, his share stolen by his own drinking partners. The treasure that had promised freedom brought only suspicion, betrayal, and death. Yet with each capture, the courts demanded the same thing. Where is Henry Every? And each time, the men offered different stories. He had sailed to Ireland, he had fled to Africa, he had been betrayed by his own crew, he had died of fever, he had drowned in a storm. The contradictions only deepened the mystery, feeding the legend until truth and lie became indistinguishable. Meanwhile, in the courts of Europe, the rage of kings grew more desperate. The Mughal emperor, furious that jewels meant for him had been stolen, demanded satisfaction, threatening to expel the East India Company from India altogether, a blow that would have crippled England's empire before it was born. To placate him, the English government issued proclamations branding Every and his men as traitors, placing rewards so vast that bounty hunters and privateers swarmed like sharks across the Atlantic and Indian Oceans, yet not one laid hands on Every. Some claimed he lived quietly in Ireland under the name Benjamin Bridgman, buying land and blending into the gentry until his death. Others whispered he died destitute, cheated by merchants who refused his coin for fear of its taint, his body buried in an unmarked grave while the greatest treasure ever stolen lay hidden, waiting. But perhaps the strangest tales came from Madagascar, where traders and sailors swore that Every had not left at all, that he had buried the bulk of his treasure in the island's jungles and lived as a king among the Malagasy, his throne carved of gold, his halls lit by stolen jewels, his enemies silenced by muskets and whispers. No evidence ever proved such tales, but they spread like fire. And even today, the jungles of Madagascar are said to hold a fortune that could buy kingdoms. If only one were brave, were foolish enough to seek it. For the men who survived, the treasure became a curse they could not escape. One survivor, William May, wandered ports from the Caribbean to Africa, his share dwindling as he drank and gambled until he died penniless, muttering Every's name with his final breath. Another, Henry Adams, tried to settle as a planter, but he was betrayed by his own overseer, who slit his throat for the jewels hidden beneath his floorboards. Even those who were never caught lived in constant fear, always looking over their shoulders, always suspecting the next man at the tavern would slip a knife into their ribs for the chance at more gold. The gallows claimed some, greed claimed others, paranoia consumed the rest. The treasure that had been seized with such brilliance destroyed all it touched, save perhaps Every himself. Yet the question remains, did Every truly escape? Or did he simply vanish into rumor, his true fate buried by time? Some documents suggest a man named Bridgman did indeed live in England after the heist, dying peacefully in his bed, but others insist this was a cover, a false trail laid by those who wanted to believe the pirate had been tamed. Other whispers claim that late one night in a Devonshire tavern, an old man with fierce eyes and a scarred hand paid for a drink with a gold coin so ancient and heavy that the innkeeper kept it until his death, swearing it was cursed. Was that man Henry Every, returned home in secret, or just another echo of his legend? The truth may never be known, but one fact endures. The treasure of the Nasa Senora du Cabo, worth more than any plunder before or since, was never recovered, never seen again in full. Some pearls surfaced in markets, some silks found their way into noble wardrobes, but the bulk, the vast, glittering mountain of gold and jewels, vanished as completely as if the sea had swallowed it. And sailors, to this day, say that on stormy nights off Madagascar, when the wind howls and the waves glow with lightning, a ghostly ship can be seen on the horizon, its sails tattered, its deck heavy with gold, and on it stands a man with a pistol at his hip, his eyes sharp as ever, daring the world to claim what he stole. The world hunted Henry Every, but perhaps that was his greatest heist of all. Not the treasure, not the jewels, but his own disappearance. He robbed not only a galleon, but history itself, vanishing into a fog of lies and whispers, leaving kings and empires clawing at shadows. And as long as his treasure lies unfound, as long as his fate remains unknown, his ghost will haunt the seas, grinning in the smoke of muskets and the whispers of sailors. For if death came to Henry Every, it came quietly, and if life endured, it endured in shadow. Either way, his greatest disguise was not of flag or name, but of silence. And silence, my friend, is harder to catch than any pirate. Gold is a strange master, captain, and no man who has held too much of it has ever been truly free again. And so it was with Henry Every's crew, those who had tasted the unimaginable wealth torn from the belly of the Nasa Senora du Cabo. For while the world sang ballads of their heist and kings spat curses upon their names, the men themselves scattered like coins flung across a tavern floor, each one shining briefly before sinking into shadow. And everywhere they went, their gold betrayed them. In the Caribbean, one of Every's men, Richard Hill, swaggered into Port Royal with rings on every finger, drunk and loud, boasting of his fortune until the governor's men dragged him off in irons. And at his trial he wept and begged, naming names, swearing that Every had abandoned them, swearing he was but a pawn. They hanged him all the same, his body swinging in the hot sun, the rings stripped from his dead fingers by the very jailers who condemned him. In Boston, another of the crew, William Bishop, tried to buy land with pearls so fine they dazzled even hardened merchants. But the pearls themselves betrayed him, too rare, too fresh, too obviously tied to the most infamous theft the world had ever known, and within a week he was in chains, paraded through the streets as a lesson that no man could outrun the company's wrath. Some fared even worse, not caught by law, but by their own greed. A man named James Lewis carried a chest ashore in Havana, swearing it would last him a lifetime, but he drank and gambled it away in less than a year. And when the last coin clinked from his hand, he was found knifed in an alley, his body stripped bare, his killers long gone into the night. The gold had not freed them, it had painted targets on their backs, brighter than any flag. Henry Every himself seemed to understand this curse better than any of his men, for while they squandered or flaunted their shares, he became a shadow, his portion hidden, his movements disguised. Whispers tell of him landing in Ireland under a false name, wearing the garb of a respectable gentleman, his beard trimmed, his manners refined, walking into churches as though he had never spilled blood. Some say he lived in Devon, calling himself Bridgeman, keeping a modest house while his fortune lay buried in secret caches across the countryside. Others insist he returned to the seas in disguise, a sailor aboard merchantman who never guessed the fortune he carried in his silence. The truth, like the man, slipped always out of reach. But what is certain is that while kings and merchants cursed him, sailors revered him, his name spoken in hushed awe, not for cruelty like Blackbeard, not for flamboyance like Rackham, but for cunning, for daring to pull off the greatest theft in history and vanishing into myth. And yet, even for Every, the weight of gold was heavy. Legends tell that in his final years, he was betrayed by those he trusted, cheated by merchants who refused his treasure for fear of its taint, left with nothing but regrets and shadows, dying not as a king but as a puppet. Was that the truth? Or was it another smokescreen, another disguise to cover a quiet death in luxury? No one knows, and perhaps that is why his legend endures, because the question burns brighter than the answer. The East India Company, still furious years after the heist, hounded every rumor, sending men to scour ports from the Indies to the Americas. They caught a handful of stragglers, gaunt men, their riches long gone, who swore they had seen every one last time. One whispered he had set sail east, toward the Red Sea, carrying the bulk of the treasure to barter with Arab traders. Another swore he had buried it all on Madagascar, deep in the jungle, guarded by Malagasy chiefs who swore blood oaths to protect it. A third insisted he had seen Every in London itself, walking past him in a crowd, his eyes still fierce, his step steady, carrying no more than a cane. Each story contradicted the last, and each only deepened the mystery. But the company used them all, spinning ballads and pamphlets, turning Every into a monster in the public imagination, hoping that by blackening his name they could wash away their own humiliation. Yet even as they vilified him, they spread his legend, and with every curse they uttered, the people loved him more. And here is the strangest truth. Captain, the heist itself, so vast, so valuable, so unprecedented, changed the very fabric of piracy. Before Every, pirates were outlaws, nuisances, men to be hanged and forgotten. After Every, they were legends, symbols of defiance against empires. His success lit a fire in others. William Kidd, Bartholomew Roberts, Blackbeard, they all followed in the shadow of Henry Every, their ambitions fed by the memory of the man who robbed empires blind and slipped away. But unlike those who came after, Every was never caught, never killed, never paraded in chains before a jeering crowd. He escaped how and where, none can say, but escape he did. And that, more than the treasure, more than the gold, is what truly enraged kings, that a man of no noble birth, no title, no crown, could defy them all and vanish into silence. Still, the curse of the treasure lingered. In Madagascar, old men whispered of chests buried beneath banyan trees, their iron locks rusting, their contents untouched for centuries. In Devon, children dared each other to dig on lonely moors, swearing Every's ghost guarded gold hidden beneath the stones. In Havana, sailors drank rum over tales that Every's diamonds had cursed entire ships, dragging them down in storms. And in India, the Mughal court remembered the insult for generations. Their mistrust of Europeans deepened by the theft of jewels meant for emperors. The heist had consequences far beyond the pirates themselves, had shaken trade, altered politics, scarred empires, and all from one man's daring. But for the crew, there was no glory, only gallows or graves. The company's noose found most of them sooner or later, and those it did not find were betrayed by greed, by drink, by paranoia. A handful may have survived into old age, clutching a coin or two, telling tall tales in smoky taverns, but none matched Every's vanishing act. His was the hand that had carved their fortune, and his was the shadow they could never escape. Even in death, if death did find him, he had outplayed them all. And yet, Captain, here is the cruelest twist. Perhaps the greatest curse was not the treasure itself, but the silence of its end. For though the Cabio's riches were real, glittering, undeniable, their fate remains unknown. Were they spent coin by coin across 100 ports? Buried in secret caches never found? Lost at sea in a storm? Or locked away still, guarded by a ghost in some forgotten cove? The world may never know, but the question burns still, centuries later, and men have killed for less than a whisper of its answer. And as the sun set on Henry Every's time, as whispers of his fate faded into the roar of newer pirates, the treasure remained a mystery unsolved, a fortune unclaimed, a ghost story that lingers in every sailor's song. For gold is not just wealth, it is a curse, and Henry Every's curse endures to this day. But the question, Captain, the question that gnaws at every man who hears his tale, is this: if the world's greatest treasure still lies hidden, who among us would dare claim it, and what price would we pay when we do? For all the noise the world made in hunting him, for all the nooses knotted in anticipation, Henry Every slipped through history like smoke through a jailer's fingers, and the more his enemies clawed for him, the deeper into silence he sank, until his very existence blurred into rumor and myth. And yet that silence was not empty, was filled with whispers, fragments, sightings, contradictions that refused to resolve. And together they painted a portrait of a man who had stolen not only treasure, but the right to decide how his story would end. And perhaps that was his greatest heist of all. Some claimed that Every returned to Ireland under the name Benjamin Bridgman, where he bought a small estate and lived as a gentleman, his neighbours none the wiser. Though servants whispered of locked rooms and strange late-night visitors, of coins too heavy, too old, passed in markets where they did not belong. Others swore he returned to England itself, living in Devon disguised as a humble farmer, but one whose soil seemed always to yield more than it should, as if gold lay beneath the furrows. Still others swore the opposite, that he never left Madagascar at all, that he crowned himself a king among the Malagasy, ruling from a hall hung with silks and lit by jewels. His men turned warlords, his treasure buried in jungle caches whose locations died with him. And yet darker stories clung like barnacles, that he tried to return his fortune to England only to be cheated, merchants refusing his coins, stripping him of wealth until he died penniless, muttering of betrayal. Each version contradicts the next, yet all survive, because no one ever proved which was true. What is known is this: the treasure of the Nassau Signora du Cabu, that mountain of gold, silver, pearls and jewels, worth more than kingdoms, vanished with him. Pieces surfaced here and there, a pearl in Boston, a diamond in Havana, a silk in London, but the bulk, the glittering heart of it, was never seen again. It became a phantom fortune, a lure for the greedy and the desperate. Sailors swore it was buried in Madagascar. Treasure maps drawn in blood passed across tavern tables, men slaughtered chasing false trails. In Devon, farmers dug into the moors by moonlight, swearing that Bridgman's land concealed iron chests. In the Caribbean, wreck divers drowned seeking a ship that might never have sunk. Generations later, still men whisper of it, and still no chest has been found. Perhaps Every scattered it in pieces so no one could trace him. Perhaps he carried it all to his grave, or perhaps it waits still, untouched. Somewhere the sea herself has chosen to guard, yet the strangest twist came years after his supposed death. In the 1720s, long after Every should have been dust. A sailor in Jamaica told of meeting an old man who claimed to be Henry Every. His eyes still sharp, his hands still scarred, his voice filled with the calm certainty of one who had outlived all his hunters. "I was king once," the man whispered over rum, "not of a country, but of silence. I stole the world's fortune and gave it back to the sea." The sailor swore the man showed him a coin unlike any he'd seen. A Portuguese doubloon so heavy it seemed to bend the light. And then the man disappeared into the night, leaving only questions. Was it truly him, or another imposter feeding off the legend? No one knows. But the coin survived, passed down through families, cursed as much as prized, a relic of a man who should not have been there. And so, Captain, we are left with nothing certain. Henry Every may have died rich, or poor, or not at all. His treasure may lie beneath jungle soil, beneath Devonshire moor, beneath the ocean's black waves. He may have lived as a gentleman, or a beggar, or a king. The only truth is this: he was never caught. No gallows bore his weight, no court broke his spirit. He did what no pirate before or after truly managed. He vanished, carrying with him the world's greatest prize and the secret of how one man made empires tremble. That is why his name endures, not because of how he lived, but because of how he disappeared. And here is the final whisper, the one sailors pass when the rum is low and the storm howls loudest, that Henry Every still walks, not in flesh, but in shadow, guarding his treasure. They say that on moonless nights off Madagascar, a lantern can be seen bobbing in the black waves, moving against the current, and if you follow it, you'll hear the creak of ropes, the jangle of coins, and then a voice, calm and cold. "Kings may hunt me, but they'll never catch me." Those who claim to have heard it swear they fled, and those who did not flee were never seen again. Legend, perhaps, but the sea does not forget, and the sea does not forgive. And so the story ends, not with gallows or graves, but with silence, the silence of a man who robbed empires and gave nothing back but questions. Henry Every, the pirate king who vanished, leaving behind the most valuable heist in history, a treasure that may yet lie waiting, if you are bold or foolish enough to search for it. Perhaps Henry Every died penniless, cheated and forgotten, or perhaps he died a king in disguise, or perhaps most terrifying of all, he never died at all, his silence his truest disguise, his treasure still hidden where only the sea knows. And if you thought this tale was wild, wait until you hear the next untold pirate story. Hit subscribe, keep your lantern lit, and remember, the sea always collects her debts.